Hey, Dr. Jon Finn here. Welcome to the Habit Mechanic podcast. Right now, you can get my new best-selling book, Train Your Brain for the AI Revolution, at tougherminds.co.uk. The digital book, audiobook, and physical book are all available at a special price that you won't find anywhere else. Hello, Habit Mechanics. Dr. Jon Finn here. Hope you've had a fantastic week so far. I'm really excited today because we're going to continue to go in depth inside the habit mechanic and take the behind the scenes tour of the stories behind the stories, look at some of the details in the book in even more detail, and just try to make it as easy as possible for you to become habit mechanics and build small new helpful habits that make your life easier. I'm joined again today by my colleague and friend, Andrew Whitelam. Andrew, how are you?
Hi there, John. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this episode of the podcast. We're looking at chapter 2 of the book, and I think for me, what this does, and I think it's clear for everyone that when it comes to resilience, well-being, developing leadership skills, developing motivation, confidence, being your best every day, I think this helps us to recognize this chapter 2, that there's a really important distinction to draw between knowing information about these things and actually doing to achieve these things. In other words, going through the processes and implementing these things and implementing changes in your daily life so you achieve these things and you develop these new mental attributes and psychological attributes. So knowing versus doing is very much the essence of this chapter 2. And I think it's fascinating to be able to talk to you in depth about this. And there's a great story in the book, which we'll come on to in a minute, to start this chapter. But the opportunity to look at that in depth is great as well. And I think it's worth mentioning, John, that we previously asked for some questions on last week's podcast, and later in this podcast we'll be announcing the winner of our mini competition, the first person who submitted questions, and we'll be answering their question later in the podcast and asking people for more. And of course, people can win a free year subscription to Habit Mechanic University app. So very well worth taking part. So as I said then, John, in chapter 2, to kick it off, there's a great story that you share with people about your own sporting exploits. And it's certainly an amazing lesson about how failure and a setback can spur you on to grow and develop and achieve great things. Would you mind sharing more?
Yeah, so you often get asked why, or I get off, well, you often, when I say you, I mean generally, things we're passionate and interested in, people ask us, how did you get into that? What was the starting point for you? And for me, my interest in performance psychology was supercharged by an experience I had whilst playing rugby. Um, Playing sport was pretty much the only thing I was good at as a kid growing up. And, surprisingly enough, that's pretty much the only thing I practiced as well. And it was, I suppose, normal for me to be one of the first picks in the team and to just find playing sport quite easy because it's just something that I enjoyed doing and spent a lot of time doing. And when I got to university, I got the opportunity to go for some trials for the international student team, and I got selected into the training squad. And that accumulated in playing a warm-up game before an international test match or student international rugby game against Australia. This was a warm-up game. It was a selection game for that game. It was a wet.
Probably worth saying, John, at this point, if you don't know your rugby, whatever code of rugby it is, Australia are always formidable opponents and always very, very testing opposition.
Yeah, so we know, well, my friend played in the game that I didn't get to, and he said it's the hardest game of rugby he's ever played in his life. Um, so yeah, and he's not bad. So it was a wet, cold, windy day in the north of England. I I think I was 19 at the time. We were playing against the men's uh, professional team, and I was just out of my depth really. I hadn't been involved at this level before. I remember distinctly in the changing rooms beforehand, players throwing up, making themselves physically sick because they wanted to get to what I now understand is the right activation level. I'd never seen that before. Um, and I was playing fullback, and that meant that part of my job is to catch high balls. And very early in the game, the ball went up. I was stood um, pretty much underneath my goalposts, sort of, so almost on the try line where the opposition need to get over to score points. The ball went up. It was swirling up around in the air. I was getting closed down quickly by two what seemed to be ginormous men. I didn't really think of myself as a man at 19, but which is maybe part of the problem. But the the thought that was in my head was, don't drop the ball, don't drop the ball, don't drop the ball. Now, this is a catch I'd made hundreds, if not thousands of times before. I didn't even drop the ball. I just completely missed the ball, and they scored a try. And I was substituted not long afterwards. And connected to that story, actually, I think the year before, or maybe 18 months earlier, I ruptured a quad muscle in my right leg, and I was a kicker. And that meant I was really struggling to train at the level of intensity you needed to train to be physically fit enough to play at those levels. And my leg just kept breaking down. So I sort of knew at that time I'm not going to be able to play it at a high level because physically my body's not up to it. So I thought, let's just try to keep playing at the recreational sort of university level. Do a good job for my university team and sort of knock the higher ambitions on the head. So then I kind of withdrew from, even though I got selected, I think, for the sevens squad after that. I didn't go because I got sick of getting injured really. But at the time, I was studying sports psychology as part of my degree. So I studied sports science, so physiology, sports psychology, motor control, which is the science of how you learn. Um, and fundamentally getting better at anything is about learning. So I started that journey very, very early in my understanding of how we actually learn. And we studied nutrition as well. But the psych really got me interested. It just grabbed a hold of me. I'd been maybe subconsciously, I kind of remembered this later, but it did always interest me, the psychology, because I was a goal kicker. Um, I played a lot of golf. I I really understood the negative impact that thinking too much could have on sports performance, especially in those what we call sort of closed skills, where you've got a lot of time to think, whether it's hitting a golf ball, catching a high ball, making a kick. And I do distinctly remember being in my father's van going to the golf club, and it was the British Open, and it was the year John Daly won it. I think it was at Carnoustie or St Andrews or somewhere, and it was maybe Friday, and Daly was leading the competition, and it was the wash up after play had finished. But the discussion was all about, is John Daly cheating? Because he was picturing the shot he wanted to make before he hit the ball. So in other words, he was using imagery to see the shot he wanted to hit. And he must have explained this in his post-round interview. So the discussion was, is that legal? Should that be cheating? Class this cheating. And I just thought that was fascinating. Maybe I was, 14, 15 years old then. So I'd had this, I suppose, deeper interest in sports psychology. That rugby experience got me thinking about it more, and the fact that I was studying sports psychology. And back to your earlier point, I knew, and you probably you don't need to study sports psychology, I don't imagine, to know that you shouldn't be telling yourself, don't drop the ball, don't drop the ball. But I had a more sophisticated understanding of things like imagery and self-talk, affirmations, those real basic sports psych stuff than most people would have. But yet, when the pressure came on, I wasn't using them. So I was kind of kicking myself a little bit. But I thought that if I can compete at high levels athletically, because my body wouldn't let me anymore, even though I was only 19, I thought it might be quite interesting to help others from a psychological, performance psychology, sports psychology angle.
So this adversity, well, I think terror is probably the right word, John, but with this rugby confrontation that you were involved in, I think many people would feel genuine terror with the physical confrontation of rugby, unless they really were used to it. That this was I suppose, a bit of an epiphany then for you, a bit of a rebirth in your thinking, and led you on ultimately to where you are today with Tougher Minds then.
Yeah, it was certainly an important ingredient. I do think those moments are probably overplayed, but because I know so much about learning. But it was definitely an important moment in my life, and you can only learn by failing. That's the key. And I fail every day, and I will continue to do so. But it's what you get out of the failure that's key. So you can dwell on it, you can beat yourself up, you can regret. But I was on LinkedIn yesterday, and someone had a post that said, my grandma said there's 2 days that you shouldn't worry about: yesterday and tomorrow. Focus on today, in other words. And I just thought it was really interesting, the wisdom of grandparents. But we can certainly learn from yesterday, and we can use those insights to help us to be our best tomorrow. So be our best today, and be our best tomorrow. But yeah, I spent a lot of my teenage years playing sport. So luckily I was able to get some lessons out of those. And one of them was certainly really important in pushing me into what I do today, helping people to become habit mechanics through Tougher Minds.
And it certainly was the start of a very long and substantial journey for you. Obviously, academic study and then practical application in the world of business, education, and elite sport of the things you develop with Tougher Minds. And you arrive today with the Habit Mechanic book, an Amazon bestseller, and the Habit Mechanic University app, and the Tougher Minds consultancy. How did the journey pan out, if you like, from your realization, and then as you started to develop Tougher Minds as an organization, and offer what you do now to people? How did that journey take shape?
Yeah, so I did my dissertation in sports psychology, and I actually looked at the role of imagery in golf. And I was really interested in how the difference in imagery use, imagery effectiveness in very good golfers, in simple terms, to kind of beginner golfers. So I did a qualitative dissertation on that, literally interviewing golfers, how they used imagery. And then I went off to work in America via something called Camp America that people might be familiar with. So the year after the summer after I finished my undergraduate degree, I went off to America, not knowing what grades I'd got or anything, which obviously you needed to understand your grade before you could position yourself to get to the next thing you were going to do, whether that was more study or jobs, etc. And I got a really nice, surprising email, said I got a first class in my dissertation, which meant I got a 2-1 in my degree, and which meant I could do a master's in sports psychology at a top, institute. So engaging and getting interested in the sport psychology piece, led to that dissertation being pretty good because I was genuinely interested in it. And then I went to study a master's in sports psychology at a different institute with some really, really groundbreaking researchers, really interesting people doing research for organizations like NASA and supporting athletes that were winning gold medals at the Olympics and breaking world records. And they were really interested. Some of the sites were really interested in the emerging neuroscience. So the technologies allowing us to look inside the brain in real time, functional MRI scanners, were becoming accessible, affordable enough for research institutes to buy them. At that time, I think the French government had invested in a lot of these machines. So all the papers we were reading were from French researchers. So I just got then more and more interested in it. And also some of those psych people that were working at the highest level in an applied way as well, not just research. And then I got a job after my master's in professional sport, essentially. I worked for a technology company called Prozone. They were the first company in the UK to offer a solution that allowed sports teams to measure player activity on the field. So how far players had run, how many passes they made, how many tackles they made, etc. And essentially they fitted cameras into stadiums and they would use that information to create data packages, if you like, that coaches could use to inform their practice. Arsene Wenger was a big early adopter. Clive Woodward was for the England rugby union team. So I was working with the coaches to show them how to use the software and interpret the results. And obviously that was about measuring and monitoring behavior ultimately. So it fit really well with my sports psych stuff. The South African rugby team at the time was using it as well. And I remember I got the opportunity to analyze a guy called Percy Montgomery, who was the very famous South African fullback, analyzing his routines, his pre-shot routines, if you like, pre-kick routines, and noticing the difference when he made successful kicks versus when he didn't. So really taking all this academic theory that I've been learning and put it into practice. That got me on some of the backroom staffs of some of these teams. It led to me wanting to learn even more, so I ended up doing a PhD to dig deeper into. I was interested in the transition between, why the very best 18-year-olds, for example, in football, might not always be deemed worthy of having a professional football contract when they're 22, 23, 24 years old. Why is that transition from being an excellent young professional athlete to an excellent seasoned professional athlete so challenging? So I did my PhD work on that, looking at the role of emotional regulation. I also worked at Carnegie, the sports faculty of what was then Leeds Met. So Carnegie is a very prestigious sports and education centre, which was one of the original training colleges along with Loughborough. So I got to teach and create applied sports psychology modules, I taught physiology as well. I taught motor control. Alongside that, I was working for the Professional Golfers Association, where I created something called the pre-shot system to make it easier for coaches to train their golfers to think and perform under pressure. And then I got the opportunity to take all that stuff that I'd been working on and go to work for a set of schools called the Monmouth Schools, which are a group of private schools in Wales, probably the top private school in Wales. People call it the Welsh Hogwarts. It's that kind of place. And the remit was basically, we want you to infuse performance psychology, sports psychology into the day-to-day lives of our young people. I had 2 years to do it, a blank piece of paper, and it was phenomenal experience and learnt lots. Managed to do some really good work there. We wrote a paper about some of that work actually, which was interesting. But that work got a lot of press attention because it was in the build up to London 2012, and we'll probably dig into some of these stories, I would imagine, later in the podcast series as well. But other schools wanted this same approach. A school called Colt in London, who we still work with now. Actually, we've been working with them this is our 10th year of working with them. They wanted to kind of plug our program into what they were doing as well. They saw the value of developing their young people to be resilient, and which was pioneering at the time. And essentially, so we had the sport, we had the education, and also we were working at university level education as well, working on things like PhD residential programs, so all the way through that educational journey. But essentially, we recognize the importance of training parents in what their children were learning. So we'd always have parent training programs as part of our school programs, and the parents essentially said, this training is much better than anything we get at work, so can you come into our businesses and do this for us as well? And that's what took us into the City of London at the request of the parents, introducing us to their employers. And in there somewhere is where Tougher Minds emerged. I think Tougher Minds really emerged after my first consultancy was called Performing Beyond Potential. And Tougher Minds, I think, emerged after Monmouth. That very specific name and, the rebrand, if you like. So yeah, that's a potted history of part of my life.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, Jon. I think the thing that is so interesting about that is this exposure you had to critical thinking, to cutting edge thinking and research and science, combined with practical application of these ideas to test them with real people in the real world, which is, of course, so important. And I think if you read the book and chapter 2 specifically, you say that it was clear the way the world is now means that process was so important because your realization was a new approach was needed to be successful, to be our best in the world we live in.
Yeah. The focus of most of my education, I'd say all my formal education in terms of learning how to help others be at their best, was very much on helping people to have more knowledge and more skills. And that story that I shared earlier, and it's also in the book, about essentially choking under pressure. I knew what I should be doing, and I actually had the skills to be able to do it, but I didn't use the skills. I did something else, and I thought there must be a better way to help people. We haven't nailed this down yet. Psychology. I find it really interesting that when I started to work in professional sport, when I worked in elite football, rugby, cricket at the top levels, I worked for the England Rugby League team. I worked with a guy called Johnny Bairstow, who's now one of the best cricketers in the world. I've worked with Premier League managers, etc. The That time when I first started working in professional sport was the first big wave of sports science being adopted across the piece. It's probably driven by people like Arsene Wenger and Clive Woodward, the same early adopters of the Prozone technology, because they were just looking for any cutting edge they could get. But at that time, the backroom staff had very minimal sports science support. They might have had one fitness trainer, a part-time nutritionist. Maybe then they started to get a bit more specialist on the strength and conditioning piece. And then they might have had an analyst. Maybe a site was in the background somewhere. Fast forward to today, if you go to the top teams, they might have, I'm not exaggerating, they might have 10 to 20 analysts. They might have 5 to 10 strength and conditioning coaches. They might have, a team of nutritionists. Most teams don't have a psychologist. So that did not spread like the other support systems spread. Why? Why wasn't it valued? It can't have been doing a fantastic job. That's the only thing I can think of, is that the people in the positions to psychologically support the athletes weren't equipped with the right knowledge and the right skills to really have the same impact that the nutritionists were seen to be having, that the fitness guys were seen to be having, that the analysts were seen to be having. And I do generally think that psychology as a science, it's probably the hardest science to crack, because it's focused on something that we can't see. It's encased inside a skull. We've only had the technologies to look at it in any kind of meaningful way. This is the brain I'm talking about, in the last 20, 25 years. So,
and John, just to interrupt, you mentioned it earlier when you were telling us about your masters. This is the functional MRI scan, magnetic resonance imaging, I think is what the abbreviation stands for. So you can actually see what's happening in the brain when people are thinking and taking actions. Is that right?
You can, yeah. And it's not magic in the sense of you can see what someone's thinking in terms of what they're saying to themselves, but you can see activity, you can see brain function much more clearly and much more reliably than we'd been able to see before. So my sense was there was a better way to take this very intangible, invisible thinking process that influences and drives everything, all our behavior, and make it easier for people to understand and access. And because, for example, I got parachuted into a group of schools where I wanted to help everyone across the school community, including those from the nursery level upwards. I had to make this really, really simple, really, really accessible. I would formally teach 10, 11-year-olds this stuff. So I knew there had to be a better way to do it. And I could see that pain point increasing for people as well, where, for my grandparents' generation, for example, they were working in the factory from being 14 years old. Being a teenager is something we've made up in the West. It's not a real thing, being a teenager. It's a label we've put on something. they were working when they were 14, and probably by their late teens, early 20s, they'd learned their core jobs and the core skills they needed to perform those jobs. And those skills didn't really change for the rest of their lives. They didn't take work home with them. There were no emails. They worked, a set period of time. If you fast forward to today, the world is very, very different. I presented at a conference just before the pandemic for the British American trade body at the Chicago Booth University campus in the city of London. And the conference was called The 100-Year Life. And it's essentially saying kids that are at primary school now, they're probably going to live till an average of at least 100, and they're going to have 4 or 5 different careers. They're not just going to go to university, get a degree, be an accountant for the rest of their life, whatever that looks like. At some point, they're going to retrain, probably go back to university, and then they'll do it again and again. So we know that the only constant in the world we live in, what's described as the VUCA world, is change. And change means that it's harder than ever to be psychologically well. It means that it's harder than ever to be at our best. And actually, when you start to understand what humans are designed to do, a lot of the things that are most instinctive for us make modern life even more difficult, because instinctively we're wired for survival. So we're wired to prioritize staying alive, being concerned about what important people in our lives think about us. And then once there are no issues with the first two things, we want to save and conserve energy. When you put a brain that's designed to do those things in a world like the world we live in, it's problematic. And that's why we have more people than ever before reporting that they're not doing very well and they don't feel very well. But again, when I looked at the solutions to help people to do better, I just wasn't convinced. And I wasn't just looking, I was trying these things out. So for me, psychometrics are more damaging than helpful. Psychometrics promote a deterministic mindset about yourself. There's a fantastic HBO documentary that came out a couple of years ago now, just taking you on a historical tour of where Myers-Briggs, for example, comes from. It was created about 100 years ago.
That's for people who don't know. Is it perhaps worth pointing out, John? That's a psychometric test that's quite well established and well respected still.
Yeah, probably the most established. It wasn't created by scientists. It was created by a mother and a daughter. Really well intentioned, no doubt about it. I'm not criticizing the intentions of it, but ultimately it was designed before we understood how brains really worked. And we know that we know about the negative impact that being deterministic about ourselves can have on our lives. That's Carol Dweck's work, Mindset, where she's observed the damaging impact that fixed mindsets can have on happiness and performance compared to what she calls growth mindsets.
That's people thinking they can't change, they can't get better, they can't implement a new approach in their lives. That's what we mean by deterministic, John.
Yes, that's it. So you've got a belief that you're either good at something or you're not good at something, and that's drilled into us. But science has shown that we're not fixed, and actually we get good at what we practice, and actually we automate and habitualize what we practice. And we now know, thanks to the work of people like the late Professor Anders Ericsson, that practice is just as, if not more, impactful than our genes, because genes are malleable. We now understand epigenetics. So yeah, I wasn't very convinced by what I was seeing. Someone who'd pushed themselves, who'd wanted to be at their best, who was actively using these ideas. I thought there must be a better way to do this. I think I'd been For someone who was studying a sports psychology masters, or I think you can swap out the word sport with performance masters in the early 2000s. I think my cohort were uniquely exposed to insights from neuroscience because I don't think anyone else was looking at it quite that way. Certainly none of the contemporaries I've met in my academic life was studying those things at that age. So I think I had a different way of thinking about things, thinking about the drivers of what made us healthy and happy and at our best. And I wasn't that compelled by what I was seeing in the market. And I thought there was a better way to do it. And that's why I created Tougher Minds.
And part of your overhaul of your view of how we should work towards being our best every day, leadership, developing resilience, developing well-being, all these critical things that we need, was the role of habit. And I think obviously people can see from your background how that's now become a very amazing reality and a powerful force in what you do and what you deliver. But tell us how that realization was achieved, Jon, and tell us more about how you then started to help people understand and work with this idea of our habits governing virtually everything we do.
Yeah, so I think the first step was making it really easy for people to understand themselves better, to start to understand how their brain worked and start to understand how they could improve their focus if they wanted to do that, so they could be more productive, or how they could improve their sleep or their diet or their exercise, or how they manage stress or their confidence, or improve themselves as a leader. So getting all those fundamental or Tougher Minds habit mechanic knowledge and skills in place, and anyone who's got the habit mechanic book and the app, it's just a toolkit. I think in the book and the app there are over 30 tools that allow you to work on yourself to improve these areas that are fundamental for being our best, whether that's better sleep, diet, and exercise, better stress management, better confidence, better productivity, better performing under pressure, tools to help you to learn more efficiently and effectively, and then all the leadership areas: role model, cultural architect, action communicator, SWOT coach. But it was one thing getting people to know those things and understand them. The next barrier was, how do you help people to implement those things and actually absorb them into their day-to-day? And that's where I started getting really interested in habits. I was very fortunate to work with another friend and colleague, Professor Jim McKenna. Jim's an applied behavioral scientist. He's interested in helping people to change their exercise behavior, essentially, or what we would now say as to build better exercise habits. So I was learning from and alongside Jim about the importance of getting people moving past what they know what they're just knowing what to do, but actually how can we help them to change behavior. Also at that time, books like Thinking Fast and Slow were coming out, which was a book by Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for his work in that area. He was talking about thinking heuristics, but really he's talking about thinking habits. So just this, how we're driven by our subconscious and automaticity. So all these insights were emerging, and I just got deeper and deeper into the habit literature. There are a few red herrings in the habit literature as well, because the pop psychology hasn't done a very good job on habits. It's very light. It doesn't really understand them. Because ultimately, if you look at the scientific literature, not everything that is a habit is labeled as a habit. So, of course, the people that are researching those books just miss those things. They wouldn't think of Kahneman's work as habits when it is habits. If we take the definition of a habit as a automatic or semi-automatic behavior. So yeah, just through a range of experiences, you know, and all the time, again, we're out there in the field, we're training people, we're getting feedback from people, we're learning what works, what doesn't work. And that's what compelled me. And I think when I first started to see the headlines about just how habitual we are, and that would come from, these numbers would come from Professor George Lakoff's work. It would have been something like 95% of what we, you know, think and do is subconscious. It's a habit. That's now up to 98%. And we think it's probably more than that. So it's quite modern understanding just how habitual we are. Certainly when I was started to study this area over 20 years ago, you know, the data wasn't around to really compel us that most of what we were doing was subconscious, was habitual. So I just went on a journey, and what's emerged is the thing that's blocking any of us being at our best is our habits. And those habits are malleable, and we can learn how to get rid of the destructive ones and build ones that are more helpful for us being at our best.
And you call this potential for change, Jon, this once you've helped people with the realization about the all-pervading role of habits, you call that a secret superpower, which is part of your approach to set people on a new direction, on a new journey.
Yeah, I think it's our superpower is learning. We are learning all the time. I've heard learning experts literally say some people just can't learn, to which I fall off my chair. You are learning all the time. Whatever you know, think of what you know now that you didn't know an hour ago, whether it was a news headline, an email that came in from someone. We're learning all the time. It's what we're designed to do. It's one of the big insights that neuroscience has shown, is that our brain is changing all the time in accordance with what we pay attention to. So it's our superpower, and it's invisible to us. You know, we're taught and conditioned from a very young age that we're either good at something or we're not good at it, because the nature versus nurture argument is so embedded in our society and how we think. Whereas the new way of thinking about ourselves is it's nature plus nurture. You know, we're a result not only of our genetic makeup, but of what we practice, and we're practicing every millisecond of the day. You know, if David Beckham didn't practice playing football, he wouldn't be a professional footballer. I can guarantee you that. So there's no innate right to be good at anything. We get good at what we practice, and we can all learn to improve. You know, sometimes that's misunderstood. You say, well, I'll never be able to run as fast as Usain Bolt. That isn't what the science says. It says, however quickly you can run now, with the right training, you can learn how to run a little bit faster. However good you are at concentrating now, with the right training, you can learn to concentrate a little bit better. However good you are at managing stress now or not, with the right training, you can learn to manage stress a little bit better. However good you are as a leader right now, with a little bit of training, you can learn how to become a better leader. So we can, wherever we are, we can move ourselves forward. But the thing we're trying to do to help us to move ourselves forwards and stay there is to turn the learning into habit. So we don't just know that it's a good idea to eat 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. We get in the habit of doing it. We don't just know it's a good idea to walk 10,000 steps a day. We get in the habit of doing it. And you know it's a habit when it's the easiest thing to do.
And that, John, is the essence, I suppose, of this knowing versus doing, which you cite at the start of chapter 2. That's it boiled down and made real for people. Just quickly then, tell us about this step-by-step process of building new helpful habits that you outline in all your training, in the Habit Mechanic University app, and in, of course, the book The Habit Mechanic. How does that work in reality for people? How do you implement it with groups and individuals?
Yeah, so we're always moving people from knowledge to skill to habit. That's the key sequencing. So if I want to improve my sleep, it was interesting actually, just in the app, the Habit Mechanic University app, either yesterday or at the weekend, someone posted that last week they got on average an extra, I think they said something like 51.2 minutes of sleep per night than they had the previous week by using our diet exercise swap tool. So this is a tool you use to monitor your sleep, your diet, your exercise, and making it a behavioral science-backed improvement plan. So that's a great example of that lady. And if you read chapter 19 in the Habit Mechanic, that information's in there. It starts by giving you more knowledge about your sleep, your diet, your exercise. Then it introduces a skill, which is the DES swap tool. And then you can create a habit building plan, which is in chapter 20, which shows you how to activate the 9 action factors to make it as easy as possible to keep using the DES swap tool every single day. And all the book is structured in that way, as is all of our training. So if we think about other approaches, you do a psychometric, you get a deterministic opinion, invalid opinion about what you're good at or what you're not good at. And actually that opinion, as miraculous as it might seem, is what you've told the tool. So the tool isn't telling you anything that you haven't told it. So you've told the tool what you think about yourself, and then it just spits it back at you in a fancy way. But then all of a sudden, you've got a deterministic understanding about yourself that I'm either good at this stuff or I'm not good at it. And then you might have a few areas to work on, but that's it. There's very little structure put around that's going to help you to secure the things that you think is a good idea for you to practice. There's very little behavioral science structure put around that to help you to actually turn that into a habit. So we've got to help people to do the intelligent self-watching, and part of that is getting more self-knowledge. We've got to help them to target a tool, like the DES swap in this case, or it could be the 5-stage team power model, or it could be the cultural architect self-assessment tool. And then we've got to help people to create a behavioral science-backed habit building plan which is based on our proprietary 9 action factor model, which we'll get into later chapters. But that's the structure. And I think this is quite a good juncture actually to step back and think about the structure of the book, because the book is very deliberately structured in a way that gives the reader the best chance of learning about themselves first and foremost before we introduce the toolkit. And that's why, so the book is broken into 4 steps. Step 1 is discover your secret superpower, which is what you just referred to, Andrew. Step 2 is learn how your brain works. Step 3, once you understand yourself in much more detail, step 3 is then when we introduce the skills. It's called habit mechanic skills. And step 4 is chief habit mechanic skills, which is an optional section. But if you want to help others to be at their best, whether you're a title leader, someone who wants to be a senior leader in the future, whether you're just a team member that wants to positively contribute, whether you're a parent, a coach, a teacher, the Step 4 Chief of Mechanic Skills will be powerful for you. But we always start our programs. We know that, one of the 9 action factors in the first one we always introduce is the habit mechanic mindset, which is really about helping people to understand how their brain actually works. That it's malleable, it's changing all the time. We are learning all the time. Straight away, that's at huge odds with what psychometrics do. Psychometrics tell you that you're fixed, essentially, even if they don't explicitly say that. That's what they're implicitly referring to. This is your type. You are this type of person. And that isn't true. You get good at what you practice. This is what I learned. It's the big problem with talent identification systems, is that they're trying to predict, and this is why talent identification systems are traditionally pretty poor, is they're trying to predict what someone's going to be good at in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, based on what they can do now. What you can do in 5 years isn't determined by what you can do today. What you can do in 5 years is determined by what you practice tomorrow, what you practice the day after that, what you practice the day after that, and so on. Because practice is so influential in what we get good at. And that's why I say very genuinely, the only way to be your best in the world we live in is to become a habit mechanic. You have to adopt that mindset that you are working on yourself and you're going to get good at what you practice. For better and for worse, it works both ways, of course, which is sometimes counterintuitive. We don't think about the idea that if I continue to practice beating myself up, that's what I'm getting really good at. They're the habits that I'm building. But in order to stop ourselves doing that, we first of all have to be aware of it. So we don't use psychometrics, use habit metrics. And the habit mechanic is full of habit metric tools that help you to learn about yourself in a really empowering way and give you the platform to start building new helpful habits, not to be deterministic about yourself and give yourself an excuse for poor behavior. Because also, if we go back to the factory model idea, the reality is that whatever you're good at today, as competent as that might make you right now, that there are going to be new skills you're going to need to be at your best in 6 months and in 12 months, because the world is changing around us all the time. So we've got to keep working on ourselves. And if we want to be happy, working on ourselves, I would argue, is the best thing that we can do, because by working on ourselves, we can help ourselves to make the personal progress that is so key to feeling good about ourselves. Just going back to the T plan that we talked about in the last episode, just by rating ourselves every day on the scale out of 10, how well did I do my best to be at my best? You start to see you are scoring higher on average, day after day after day. And it's like the lady reported in the app about getting nearly an extra hour sleep per night, which is seismic, by the way. But I know I see that time and time again because these tools work. And there's so much noise out there in this space, so many things that promise so much but never deliver because they're not based on good science. They're not developed by people that have spent their entire life doing this. Those tools do that time and time again. They allow you to make personal progress. So if you want to work on yourself, the toolkit is there. It's all in the Habit Mechanic book and the app.
Well, Jon, that's a great point, I think, to start to draw this podcast to a close. Absolutely fascinating insights and stories there. Thank you for sharing those. And I think people will be, if they haven't already read the Habit Mechanic book, I think they'll be very, very intrigued and motivated and prompted to do so. And all that revelation, all that insight and more is in there. So I certainly, as someone who's read it, would encourage anybody to pick up a copy and really read a lot more about those amazing insights you shared with us today on this podcast. Now, you mentioned the Habit Mechanic University app. And of course, you very kindly created an opportunity for people to win a free subscription to the premium level of that when that goes live, by asking people to submit their questions to us, and we'll answer them on this podcast. We've already done that, and we've had some fascinating questions in. And as I say, we'll just conclude, if we can, just by looking at one of those questions. This has come in from Pauline. So Pauline, thanks very much for your question. By the way, as I say, please do keep submitting your questions via the website to us. But back to Pauline's question, we've talked about professional sport a lot on this podcast, this specific episode. So it seems to me to be appropriate to answer this question too. And I think it's something that will chime with a lot of people, and people will relate to. We often hear professional sports people talking about psychological concepts and ideas in their interviews when we watch sport on TV. But Pauline's question is specifically, is it easier for professional sports people to use goal setting tools than regular people, as she describes them? Because professional sports people already have a defined direction or a target or even a passion.
Yeah, it's a great question. My experience would be, no, it's not. There are plenty of professional sports people who don't want to do what they're doing, who are fed up, who would rather be doing something else, who turn up for work every day and go through the motions. They're not passionate. They're not interested. They're human beings at the end of the day. And whether you're getting paid £100,000 a week or, nothing, life can be challenging. So yeah, but I understand why it's easy to look at those people and think that they can easily be super motivated, etc. I think it's really interesting if you, in chapter 32 of the book, The Cultural Architect, I really dig into self-determination theory, which I think is the best motivation theory out there. Self-determination theory, or to be self-determined, means that you've chosen to do this thing. And we understand that as the most robust type of motivation. So if you're self-determined, you're going to keep persisting for longer. You're going to keep going because you've chosen what you want to do. The theory emerged by the work of a researcher called Harry Harlow, who got fascinated by his lab animals. So he had primates in his labs that he was doing some, I don't think it was, bad research. He was doing some fairly mild research, observing their behavior. But before the night before one of a research experiment started, I think he just wanted to calm them down. So he put something like a Rubik's Cube in each of the cages. And when he came back in the morning, he was fascinated by the fact that we're all playing with them. And this kicked off this whole area of self-determination theory research. And you can think of self-determination, it's on a continuum. One end is, I chose to do this, I want to do this. The other end is, I'm being coerced to do this, I'm doing it because I have to do it. And when you're on that end of the continuum, your motivation is much more fragile and you're much more likely to give in easy. And there's some research that I found really interesting where they actually started to pay children to play. So they, had children in a laboratory setting, and there's a load of toys, and they let them play, and they, timed and observed how long they played for what they did. Then they introduced another condition where they started to pay some of the children to play. And as soon as they started to pay the children to play, their motivation dropped off. They didn't want to do it. And you would argue that moved them from something that was a very self-determining activity to something that was far more coercive. And there's lots of steps in between. And I share in the Cultural Architect chapter how you can make what you ask other people to do more self-determining. You will notice that the habit mechanic is set up in the book, and our approach is set up in a very self-determining way. I never tell you to do anything. Nothing in our approach is prescriptive. It's about you doing what helps you. You'll only know what helps you by trying things out. So everything is framed as, if it's helpful, try this. If it's helpful, do this. So yeah, I think that, very successful professional athletes do talk a lot about goal setting. And that's probably why we think it's easy to think that it's quite easy for professional athletes to do that. But if you're struggling for motivation, go to chapter 16 and start creating the FAM story. That's a tool that we've created via our work in professional sport, but also in education and in the workplace. And we know that if your motivation is low, then using an intelligent goal setting tool is going to help you to improve your motivation. I don't know of a better tool than the FAM story. People tell me every day how it's helping them and why it's so powerful. So that's a great question, Pauline. Thank you for submitting that. Let me just, Andrew mentioned, if you go to our website, if you go to the contact us page, you can submit a question there. Just note question for the podcast, and then you'll get entered into the draw. And then, but if you don't want to contact us via the website, just email us at contact@tougherminds.co.uk and email us your question there, and we'll read another question in the next episode.
Okay, Jon, thanks so much for that. I think we've reached the conclusion of what's been another fascinating episode of the podcast. Thanks again for your insight. Thanks again for sharing your stories with us. I guess it's important for people to take to them that you can like and subscribe to this podcast on so many platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube now as well. So by all means, like and subscribe to us there. And Jon, anything else you'd like to say just to conclude this episode?
Yeah, thanks for listening. And remember, it's not about knowing new things. It's about doing things differently. And the easiest thing to practice doing differently, to start to practice doing something differently is try the T plan, which is chapter 1 of the book. We did an entire episode on it last week in the last week's podcast. There's people in the Habit Mechanic University app posting their T's every day. So if you're not sure what a T plan should look like, or you want some more examples beyond what's in the book, just go into the app. Remember, if you post it in the app, you get the extra benefits of the community support, holding yourself accountable, and just activate some more of the behavioral science and gets it on your side. So take positive action. The T plan only takes 2 minutes, and you will start to see some positive results. I guarantee it. So yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you to everyone for listening. And remember, you're only one habit away. Thanks for listening to the Habit Mechanic podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe and tell someone else about one of the ideas or insights that you found most interesting.